It is not the same thing to know Jesus as not to know Jesus. It's not the same thing to know Jesus as not to know Jesus. It's something that Pope Francis, our Holy Father, has said. And when you think about that Christian difference, it's kind of like, what is the Christian difference, right? Why is my life different as a Christian? Because sometimes it's hard to see it. Sometimes it's hard to feel it. But the difference, I think, is put on full display. I think that it's really felt very deeply, especially in these words of Jesus today, in that astounding commandment that Jesus gives to us. When Jesus says to his disciples, "Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you." And so Christians are different because we love our enemies. That first reading from the first book of Samuel, King David has this golden opportunity. He's been pursued by Saul. Saul is the king at the time, and he wants to kill David because he is afraid of him. He thinks he's going to usurp the throne. It's not very rational, but anyway, Saul, he wants to kill David with all of his might, and so he keeps chasing him all around the land to try to put him to death. And David finally has this opportunity, right? Saul is asleep on the ground. He's right next to him. He's got the spear right next to him that he could do the deed with. And his follower, David's follower, says, "Let me do it. I'm just gonna strike him down, and you're not gonna have to worry about this anymore. Your enemy is gonna be gone." And David says, "No. Don't do it." He says, don't harm him. Don't harm the Lord's anointed. And so even though David had that perfect opportunity to get rid of his enemy, instead he chooses love. He chooses peace in that moment. We see in the New Testament with Jesus, who is the new David, he has sort of a similar circumstance. Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, you remember the soldiers are coming at him with clubs and with swords. His enemies are coming to arrest him and to put him to death. One of his disciples strikes out against those soldiers. He actually harms one of the soldiers that are there, and Jesus says, "Put your sword into its sheath." And Jesus says, "Do you think that I cannot call upon my Father, and he will not provide me at this moment with more than 12 legions of angels?" Right, in that moment, Jesus is saying, this is not a threat, right? I could wipe everybody out as quickly as I wanted to, right? If he wanted to, Jesus could have gotten rid of all of his enemies and he could have triumphed. But in that moment, Jesus again, just like David, Jesus chose peace. Jesus chose mercy. And that's the same choice that we're going to see Jesus make on the cross, of course, when his enemies are now crucifying him out of hatred, and Jesus says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." That supernatural life, that supernatural love that is flowing from the lips of Jesus in that moment, it's the same supernatural life that is poured into each one of us at our baptism. At our baptism, God pours his own divine life into our souls and helps us to do what we would not be able to do on our own. Because, loving enemies, that's probably one of the hardest commandments. It's not really that easy to do, and in many cases it's just impossible for us to do as human beings. But when that supernatural life of God, when the love of God is within us, then it gives us the strength to do what we would not be able to do otherwise. In 2016, there was a young man who walked into Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina, and he came for a Bible study, but he had other intentions in his heart. He came and they welcomed him even though he was a stranger, and after some time, he took out a gun. And at the trial, after he had done what he had come to do, at this trial, the judge invited those families of the victims to come forward. And when those families came forward to address this man who had basically taken everything from them, family after family after family came up to the microphone, and they had the same message. They said, "We forgive you, and we want you to know God." I don't think you can explain that through human love alone. I think that's something that comes from Christ. Because there is no act of hatred that is more powerful than the love and the mercy of Christ. There's nothing that is more powerful than the love of Christ on the cross. You know, you think about Jesus on the cross, he came to take away the sins of the whole world. And so all of the hatred of humanity, all of our malice and our wickedness, all of our murder and our violence, all of that evil was placed upon Jesus at that moment. And Jesus responded not with anger like we probably would have deserved, but Jesus responded with mercy. Jesus responded with love for his enemies. You know, when we said, "I hate you," Jesus said, "I love you, and I love you so much I'm even willing to suffer and die for you." If we have been so loved by Christ while we were enemies of God, if he loved us so much, then we too should love our brothers and sisters. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be something that we can do based upon our own power, but when we have the grace of God within us, when we have the supernatural life of God, that grace of charity that's poured into our souls, then we can do it. We can do it. It's different for us as Christians. We're different because we know Jesus. And Jesus has poured his life into our souls. Christ Jesus has loved us while we didn't deserve it. May we also love our enemies.